Hey everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Edel Lane's Sapphic Storytime. Today I come to you from my beautiful mountain outside the back door of my house, where we have this lovely opportunity to commune with nature and to remember what our world looked like before human hands started changing everything. I am wearing orange today because it is Orange Shirt Day, or here in Canada, Truth and Reconciliation Day. And I wanted to kind of let you know a little bit what that's about, because people from around the world may not be aware of this, and also because one of my novels, which is Walks with Spirits, is set right here in this land at a time before Europeans ever arrived. Now, after Europeans arrived, obviously things began to change. And one of the things that has happened here in Canada is a realization of mistakes that were made, and now an attempt by the government, the churches, and those of us from European descent to reconcile with our Indigenous neighbors who were wronged for so many years in so many ways. So my shirt says, "Every child matters." And this is really a remembrance for children that suffered perhaps the most. Back, a little more than 100 years ago, in the very end of the 1800s, a push went throughout Canada for a type of integration of Native Americans into the culture in such a way that those in the powers that be thought it would be better if they simply assimilated into the European Canadian-based society. And such efforts also were underwent in the United States, who is not totally out of the story at all. And so they set up a system of residential schools. Some were operated by the government, some were operated by churches, some had altruistic, wonderful things in mind, none of which had enough funding, and many of which were operated very corruptly. And under this system, little children as young as 5 and 6 years old were taken away from their Indigenous families and placed in this boarding school where they had to stay all the time, where they were indoctrinated with, you must speak English, you must learn the English way of doing things, or in some cases the French way of doing things, and you must, convert and become Christian, and you must, dress this way and follow these customs, and so forth and so on, which in and of itself is really horrendous. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. With the schools being terribly underfunded and sometimes staffed with unscrupulous personnel, the children did not receive proper diet, did not receive proper health care, did not get warm blankets and clothing for the wintertime, were often spent more time of the day working than going to class. And many, many of them died. Now, the government and the churches did not know the extent of that, because in most cases, when parents would come looking for their child, they would be told they ran away. Or when government inspectors came to check on if they were doing what they were supposed to do, they would be told that these children just ran away. We don't know what happened to them. They disappeared. Now, they did record some deaths, and they did inform some families, and that was tragic enough. But a few years ago, one of the sites of these schools was going under renovation. And when the bulldozers came in and all of the working equipment, they discovered something that they were not expecting to find. Mass graves with hundreds of children's skeletal remains, dating back from the late 1800s all the way up through the 1950s and 60s. And these schools were not actually closed until the 1970s. And so all of these children that had just been forgotten, buried away in some little remote, unmarked location so that the school could not have to accept responsibility for their deaths. And of course, the public outcry in the last several years has been great, both from the Indigenous community and from the non-Indigenous community. We are all heartbroken to discover that government officials, church officials, people who were supposedly titled as school teachers and nurses were all in on this big cover-up in order to come out not smelling quite so bad when all was said and done. And so a push went underway to investigate every site where a school had been, and they brought in those cadaver finder machines to roll around looking for, and many of these sites have uncovered dozens or hundreds of forgotten bodies of these children that date back from a few decades ago to 100 years ago. And so now we want to recognize, we want to say, I mean, obviously my ancestors were not here at the time because they were back in the U.S. South committing their own sins that they had to atone for. But the entities such as the government and the churches and everyone who was involved in running these schools, many of which were ancestors of people who live here now, and many of the descendants who had relatives who died in these schools, and they never even knew what happened to them. So we are trying to get the word out that every child matters, no matter the color of their skin, no matter their ethnicity, no matter their culture, their dress, their sexual orientation, no matter their religion, no matter their language. Every child counts. You know, about 60 years ago, when I was a very small child, one of the first songs I ever learned stuck with me and became a bit of a paradox as I grew up in the 1960s and 70s and went through all of the racial turmoil and the fights over integration and stuff that we went through at that time. And this song, so simple and yet so poignantly true and appropriate for the topic of today. Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world. Red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. And we should too. Every child matters. They are our future. And children who have been kidnapped, who have been abused, who have suffered, I think there's probably no greater crime that can be committed in the world than to harm a child or to try to stifle their dreams or their potential. And it's just monstrous to think that people did that we know they did. And what's even more monstrous is to know that illegally, under the cover of darkness, behind the scenes somewhere, that kind of thing still goes on today with the kidnapped and missing children from around the world that end up being put into slavery of one form or another, some because a relative put them there, and some because they were just snatched off the street. I don't know all the things that can be done, but I do know that here in Canada we are trying to grow awareness of the mistakes, apologize for those mistakes, and reach out to our Indigenous brothers and sisters to say, what can we do now to walk hand in hand with you and go forward in a different kind of relationship, one of mutual respect and appreciation. So, not a whole lot about writing today, but a little bit about Orange Shirt Day, a little bit about Truth and Reconciliation. And if you have not read Walks with Spirits, You can pick it up at Amazon. It has none of this in it. It's totally historical fantasy, set in the Northwest before Europeans ever arrived. A kind of look at a time capsule of a very rich and full civilization that existed on this land for thousands and thousands of years before our ancestors showed up here. And they still have a thriving culture today, our Indigenous brothers and sisters. Yesterday, my partner Joanna and I went to a powwow of several Stolo tribes here in our local area, where they invited the public to come and experience with them and to engage in their dances and the drumming and eat a feast together and meet and mingle. And it was just a wonderful experience. So, going forward, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time with some more content here on Edale Lane's Sapphic Storytime.